At Reason magazine, reason.com, they've got a harrowing story about a college student in the University of Virginia who said that protesters would make really good speed bumps. And well, as you can imagine, there was quite an outcry on campus and on social media. Her life was ruined because of what she said. The only problem is she didn't say it. Let's bring in the author of this great article at Reason, which is really sort of an allegory for everything that's wrong on our college campuses, in our modern political dialogue, and certainly on social media. Here's Emma Camp. Emma, thank you for joining us, and thanks for writing this. It's a really stunning story.
Thanks for having me.
So take your time here and sort of lay out this narrative. What actually happened here?
So, Morgan Bettinger was a rising senior at UVA when she was subject to a series of unsubstantiated allegations. So, what was alleged online, primarily on Twitter, by a popular student activist named Zayana Bryant, was that Morgan had driven around several police barricades, pulled up to this protest. It was a Black Women Matter protest. Something I should know is that this happened during the summer of 2020, sort of during the height of the post George Floyd protests,
Mhm.
and that she had several times told protesters that they would make good speed bumps, also with an expletive in there as well. And something to note is that this protest happened about a block from where Heather Heyer was killed. She was killed by a white supremacist during the Unite the Right rallies. And so, obviously that would be a terrible thing to say. These allegations were levied on Twitter. There was a mass campaign to try to get her expelled from school. This was written up by local news. And in the end, she was actually punished by the university. She received a litany of sanctions, including expulsion in abeyance, 50 hours of community service, an apology letter to Bryant, and sort of ideological retraining sessions. But the problem with this is that a later investigation from the university, and in fact, the student jury that punished her, actually takes Morgan's side. So a later investigation released by the University of Virginia's Office of Civil Rights. So that first investigation that punished her was actually run by students. So this later one was run by the professional investigators at the university. What they actually found is that there was no evidence supporting any of Bryant's claims. So to back up a little bit, what Morgan says happened is
Mhm.
that she was driving home from work one day when she saw a public works truck blocking the street ahead. She was a little confused. There was kind of an optical illusion, and she got a bit too close and realized she couldn't turn a car around. And so she knew there was some kind of protest, so she got out of her car just to kind of investigate. And what happened is that the driver of this public works truck, he later said this in an interview with police, that he started a conversation with her. And they had sort of a casual conversation where Morgan says she said something to the effect of, well, it's a good thing you're here because otherwise these people could have become speed bumps. And what she meant by that, she told me was, this protest was in the middle of the road. I'm glad nobody got hurt and that this truck was here.
Yeah.
And so she went around the truck, took a picture of protesters, and that's when they started taking an interest in her. They later swarmed her car. There are videos of them being very aggressive, shouting expletives at her, getting really in her face. And so, what this later investigation found is that none of Bryant's claims that she had gone up to protesters, that she had spoken to protesters, that she had that she had said these really terrible, threatening things to protesters, there was no evidence for any of that. So all of
Right.
this apparently happened in front of a crowd of over 30 people, but the university couldn't find a single reliable witness to back any of that up. And they even found that it was more likely than not that Bryant had never heard Morgan make a speed bumps remark. So basically, they found it was more likely than not that
Right.
she didn't hear anything, that she was either perhaps lying by omission or not telling the full truth.
But th
Um,
but this kangaroo court on campus, led by students, as you said, they went ahead and levied all of the. By the way, how does a student court or jury have this kind of power to be able to levy such penalties against a fellow student?
So the University of Virginia is very specific. I couldn't really find another college where students have such power over discipline. So weird thing about UVA is kind of aside from Title IX, if you are punished by the university, it will be by your fellow students. We also have an honor code. The system that punished Morgan is called the University Judiciary. It's called the UJC, and they handle everything that isn't under the honor code. And the strange thing about that student jury is while it punished Morgan, It didn't give a lot of indication as to why it reached its decision, but what it did say is you yourself admitted saying, it's a good thing you're here. Otherwise, these protesters could have become speed bumps. When you said this, it was threatening. But the thing is, saying Morgan's version of her comment is just facially First Amendment protected speech. And the University of Virginia is a public university. And even if it is by a student jury, they cannot punish student for constitutionally protected speech. And so it appears as though they blatantly violated her First Amendment rights. And so, especially after months later, this EOCR investigation came out finding that there was simply no evidence for any of Brian's claims. Both the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education and Morgan's private lawyer kind of lobbied the university, asking them to expunge Morgan's record with the UJC. And the school refused. They sort of threw up their hands and went, well, it was a student jury. It's out of our hands. But that's simply not how the Constitution works.
No. And by the way, let's just remind everybody, this is the University of Virginia, the home of James Madison, the man who wrote the First Amendment and much of the Constitution. George Washington, the man who presided over the Constitutional Convention. You can see Thomas Jefferson's house from the campus in Charlottesville. This is unbelievable that this happened here. And yet, I mean, what has become of Ms. Bettinger? What has she had to do now? Is this something that's going to follow her along into her professional career?
So the tragic thing is that it seems that it is. So Morgan was in basically a pre-law major at UVA. She can't go to law school. She would have to disclose that she was found guilty of threatening students in a law school application. So she's from Charlottesville. She's still living there now. And this really has kind of put a permanent kind of roadblock in her life. It really has permanently tarred her reputation. I was a student at the University of Virginia at the time when this happened, and there really was a sense on campus that everyone knew who she was, and everybody knew that she was this vile, terrible racist who had threatened protesters. And nobody really stopped to question whether or not there was any evidence, because the thing is, there never was any evidence. Brian posted a series of videos of the incident's aftermath, and many people that I spoke to at the time seemed to think that those videos showed Morgan engaging in any misconduct, which they simply didn't.
And what about Ms. Bryant? She's the activist for Black Lives Matter or Black Women Matter. That was the protest that day. She's the one who has provided this false testimony and created this false narrative. Any repercussions for her, or is she celebrated?
No, she continues to be a celebrated activist. So before this even happened, Bryant was a bona fide public figure. She gained a lot of notoriety when she was in high school for her activism. She wrote a petition to take down a Confederate statue in Charlottesville. And so after this, she's received glowing profiles in the Washington Post. She has also been written up favorably in the New Yorker and the New York Times and National Geographic. And, Xana Bryant is probably, other than an athlete, the most visible UVA student. Her face, while this was happening, her face was on the side of a university bus. So she is extremely well known at the university. And I think that's part of why so many people jumped to believe this story in whole cloth, right? It was a beloved UVA student who has a history of activism, who is making an allegation of terrible racism. And because of that, it played into everybody's biases and nobody really stopped to question it.
It's horrible. And by the way, I mean, there are some quirky aspects of this that are specific to the campus in Charlottesville, but let's face it, this story could be repeated, sadly, in most college campuses in America today.
No, I mean, I think stuff like this happens all the time because, there's a sense where a story like this is so good, right? It's so good that you kind of want it to be true because say if you're an activist, it sort of shows that your activism is needed, right? That there's still people saying these terrible things. But the thing is, it's really important to have a sense of skepticism. And I think whenever you see an outrageous story that plays into your political biases, be you on the right wing or on the left or somewhere in between, it's really important to kind of check the evidence before you run with it. And I think this should be a cautionary tale for everybody, regardless of their political beliefs, about questioning a story that seems a little too good to be true. Because if it seems a bit too good to be true, it probably is.
It's something that I agree that everybody across the political spectrum needs to be accountable for and be responsible about. I just got to tell you, from where I'm sitting, it keeps seeming to be happening in one direction in the political conversation in this country more often than not. Emma, thank you. Great stuff at reason.com. There's more to come on O'Connor tonight.